Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we are going to talk about something that is fresh on my mind today. I am in the process of rereading The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And for those of you who are part of our book study, you already know that this is coming up and we're in the thick of this right now, or in the thick of it, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. But I'm reading it with through a different set of eyes now, because I think the first time I read it, it was several years ago. And I'll be honest, you guys, I use stuff from this book all the time. So even if you're not in our book study, I encourage that you read this book because it's just got some fantastic gems in it. Anyway, I have asked Cody to have this conversation with me today. So he is here for those of you who are listening and not watching. I know I haven't mentioned him yet, but he's right here next to me today. Cody, welcome back to the podcast. Glad you're going to be able to have this discussion with me today.
Yes. Thank you.
You betcha. Okay. So one of the things that jumped out at me as I was reading this was the idea of responsibility. And Darren Hardy talks in there about how we need to take 100% responsibility for anything that we want to go well. He used the example of a marriage. He was at an actual retreat someplace and I think he said he was 22 years old or something. And the professor or whoever was talking said, in a marriage, how much percentage do you have for responsibility in making that marriage work? And he's like, I was so smart. I was all wise and stuff at 22. And I'm like 50-50. Like there has to be equal share. I'm not going to ruin everything for you, but the end result was the guy wrote on the board 100/0. And he said, you need to be 100% responsible and have zero expectation of the return. And I just thought that was really interesting. And I wanted to talk today, if it's okay, about how we can take that information and apply it to how we're working our business. Because I think so many times we fall victim to victimhood. It's like, I don't know if there's a better way of saying that, but we like to point our fingers at why something is not going in our favor. It's their fault. The economy's bad. The government is crazy. Whatever. The society is nuts. And it's easy for us to say things like, no one wants to pay for financial coaching. No one can afford it. And we just start to put all of the onus on outside forces. And we actually, if we can start taking responsibility for all of that, we start to become more aware of how it is that we are showing up, what we could do differently. And you know what? I think the thing I love so much about this, Cody, is that it gives us back control. I was actually talking to one of the coaches that I coach. And we were talking about, the whole concept of ideal client and how do you find it? And this individual is very soon in his business. He hasn't had a client yet. So he's really just he's stuck in that mentality that he has to define this before he goes out and starts working, right? And so I'm like, that's kind of a chicken and egg issue. It's like, are you going to wait until you know exactly what you're looking for before you go find it? Or are you going to go find someone to work with and start to hone in on who it is that you enjoy working with? So anyway, in an attempt to help him start to clarify this a little bit, I told him, one of the things that I realized I can't work with very well. I work very well with people who have different political ideology, different bents in a lot of things. I have no problem putting all that stuff aside and just showing up for my client. One of the problems that I do have showing up for is victimhood. And I think it's mostly because I know as a coach that I only have so much to do with where people go from where they are. And if that person is so stuck in, I am the recipient of everything and I don't have any control over my outcomes, then I'm going to have a really hard time helping move that person. So if I feel like we can kind of get over that victimhood mentality, then I have no problem working with that person. But if I've tried and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, that's where I'm just like, you know what? I don't think that this is going to work. We're going to have to find some other solution for you. So as I was reading it, that happened with this other coach. That happened, I don't know, probably 4 days ago. And then as I was reading this book, and this came up, and I thought, oh my gosh, I want to talk to Cody about that, because I just think it's something we can absolutely throw into our coaching business. So I've done a lot of jabberjawing over here, and I'm going to just shut up for a second and let you weigh in.
Well, I totally agree. It's funny that you had that conversation with that coach the other day, because I was also talking to one of my friends that I went to high school with. He started coaching recently. And he's a different kind of coach. Like, he's basically like, hey, like, I'm going to help you get what you want to happen in life, like within X amount of time kind of thing. And, you know, we were talking about, like, he was thinking like, oh, well, you know, I'll charge this month or this much, but if you don't get the results, then I'll give you a refund, or, you know, I'll work for free until you get these results, and blah, blah, blah. And I told him, I was like, I understand why you're doing that, but I want to caution you that sometimes even through your vetting process of, you know, seeing if someone's a good fit for you, sometimes they may appear to be a good fit for you, and then you hop in and then you find out deeper things about them, and they don't show up, and they don't do the things that they're supposed to, and they're not consistent with things, and they don't get the results that they were hoping for. And that's not on you, that's on them. Right? Because you could show up fully as the coach, but it doesn't really matter unless they also show up fully as well.
Agreed.
And that goes, you know, back to like taking responsibility and not being a victim and stuff like that. But you're absolutely right. Like, what happens or does not happen within our coaching practices 100% has to do with how we show up, and you know, what we do every day, you know, how we think, what we're willing to do, you know, all that kind of stuff. Because at the end of the day, like, if you're sitting back and you're like, well, I don't really feel like doing this today, or the next day or the next week, then you're probably not going to get the thing that you want. And that's not anyone's fault other than, you know, yourselves. And you have to take responsibility for that. But the good side of the coin is that if you were to show up and you were to do those things and you get that result, you can also take responsibility for that too, because you were the one who caused that to happen. And I love that you opened this conversation up with the idea of, like, you know, how much effort do you put into the marriage? You know, the 50-50 versus 100% and 0. Because I've heard that too. And that's a really, really good analogy to go off of, because you're right. Like, we can't just expect to show up 50% for our spouse. Right. I mean, like, if we really think about that statement, like, logically it makes sense. Like, it's a 100% of a marriage. But if each person is showing up 50%, that's not a good marriage. You know, like, you need it to be 200%. You know, that's a good marriage. It's 200%, not 100%, mathematically speaking. Right. And it's the same thing with our practices. Like, you know, maybe we are the only person working in our practice, you know, on our end. That's 100%. So if you're showing up 70% or 80%, then just expect to get 70, 80% of what you want. But even with your clients, that's kind of like a marriage in a way. Like, it's a relationship, and that needs to be communicated early on. You know, like, hey, you want to get here, I'm going to help you get there, but this is not a 50-50 thing. This is 100% thing. Just like a marriage, you know, you don't have to tell them it's just like a marriage. That might intimidate them. but in your head, you know, you're looking at it like, hey, like, this is just like a marriage. I'm going to show up 100%. You need to show up 100%. And that's what it's going to take in order to get those results.
So I'm going to actually hit pause on this for a second, because one of the things that absolutely rocked my world when I read that, and again, I'm rereading this, which I'm only saying out loud because I want you to hear that I obviously needed to hear this part again, when I saw that he was talking about 100% and he brought up the marriage thing, my mind went exactly where your mind went, where it's like, it's 100, right? What I thought was absolutely cool about how he wrote it was that he actually wrote 100/0. And where that like was this light bulb moment for me was, it's not that you're expecting that they come to the table with zero, right? 0%. But you have to have zero expectation. So even with the clients, like, yes, you want them to show up. And if they're not going to show up, they might be stuck in this victimhood. And so what we're looking at is we're looking at two separate people when we're talking about the coaching relationship. But when we're just looking at ourselves as the coach, we need to show up 100% with zero expectation of what they're going to do. Because if we have these expectations of how they're going to show up, then we need to be like, well, if it doesn't go right, then it gives us that right to point the finger and go, well, it didn't work because they didn't work. Right. And it takes that responsibility off of us. And so this is that encouragement to actually take 100% responsibility for everything that you can do and do. And it makes it's just a whole different thing. So having seen that again, it's like, oh, now I learn in chunks, I guess. Like I learned some really great stuff from this book 4 years ago, and I've been applying so much of it. And now that I'm going back, I'm like, oh, I'm picking up on different things, and now I get to apply this thing. So I didn't mean to correct what you're saying, but just to drive home that 100/0 that I did not expect to see come off that paper when I was reading it earlier. So
yeah, it's a good point, because like, I think that statement, it just drives home the thought that like, you can only control what you can control,
right?
Kind of thing. And one of the things that you can control is yourself, right? Yes. And if you can focus on that, and you can make sure that you show up and you take full responsibility for yourself in every way, chances are that you're probably going to see some sort of results from that.
Oh, right? Yeah, there's not even just a chance. Like, I mean, it's a guarantee, and we don't guarantee much on this show. One of the things that he writes out, and you've alluded to this several times, so I'm just going to throw it out there, is we take responsibility for what we do, what we don't do, and then how we react to what is done to us. And I think so many times, like, we talk, especially as coaches, like, I'm responsible for what I do. Am I showing up 80% of the time? And we focus on that. What we're not focusing on is what we're not doing. So when you said earlier, like, I don't feel like doing this today, instead of like calling that to 20%, like, we actually show up and say, I chose not to do this today. And that has this whole different effect on us and our conscience. And we're like, oh my gosh, like, I have to really take responsibility for not doing that thing today. And then there's what about what other people do to us? We can't control what other people do to us. We can control how we react to that. And I think that's just a really great reminder of, when something's going wrong, how are we reacting to that? And we can start laying the foundation for this for our clients, very early on in the relationship. I lay this foundation for my kids early on. When they say, I have 4 children, they inevitably will fight at least 400 times in any given 24-hour period of time. And so I hear this often, like, well, she made me mad. And they're only 4 and 10, and I still take the time to remind them that no one has enough power to make you mad. You feel a certain way, and this happened first. You are responsible for how you feel about that. Now, it's a tough lesson. I mean, it really is. I'm still learning it. I think most people listening today are still learning it.
It's hard to understand.
That's right. But if we start to lay that foundation early on, it becomes easier and easier for them to understand. So, as our clients, what you said earlier, I say to every single client, and it's that part about you get to take responsibility for the good things too. I tell them that from the get-go. Look, I'm not responsible for the choices that you make. So if something goes wrong and it was a choice that you made, that onus belongs to you. But on the other side of that coin, if you do something and it goes fantastically great, I don't want credit for that.
Mm-hmm.
I won't take credit for that. And when people try to, oh, it's all because of you, I'm like, you're going to have to rephrase that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I appreciate the attempt, at giving that solid feedback and recommendation, all that. But every time I say, I need you to rephrase that because I didn't do it.
Right.
So, yeah.
And that's really, really important. Because it's easy to take credit for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Very mature.
I have my moments. I have much to learn and many areas to grow. I do have moments of goodness, though.
Yeah.
So thanks. I appreciate that. So yeah, anything else that you want to add to this? It's just something that came out of nowhere, and I just wanted to talk about a little bit. But we certainly don't have to beat a dead horse.
Yeah, I think that what we had said really drives home the whole conversation. But if there's one last thing that I will say is that I already said it once before, but like you can only control what you can control, right? And the best thing about that is that you have your own choices on how you decide to show up and take responsibility for the things that you do as well as that you don't do, like Maria had said. And just understand that wherever you're going to go with your coaching practice, it's up to you. And you might be hearing me say that and you're like, great, right? You might be hearing me say that and you're like, oh crap. But at the end of the day, no matter where you're at, it is up to you. And you can turn that oh crap into a great by simply choosing to do that.
Yeah.
So,
and I like to provide some sort of practicality application when I'm able to do that. So we're going to close today's episode with that very thing. If you are in that oh crap arena that Cody was just talking about, one of the things that you can actually do in order to become more aware of how you are showing up for your coaching practice is to actually track everything that you do in a given day and do that for at least a week. It's actually one of the things that they suggest in the book about any area of your life, but I'm just going to hone in on your coaching practice specifically here. If you say, my coaching practice is not where I want it to be, then one of the things that you can start doing on a daily basis is carry around a little piece of paper and a pen, or Remarkable, because I've really grown to love that. Anyway, to write down every time you show up for your coaching practice. Say, what did I do today? And just start writing that down. And I know that you're like, well, that's going to take up too much time when I could be dedicating it to coaching. No, it's not. You're going to be just fine. You're going to waste that time anyway. So track that time and see what it is that you're doing. And you're going to start to see patterns show up of things that you are doing, things you aren't doing, things you're choosing to not do, and how you're reacting to how people in your practice are interacting with you. So that is your one practical tip of today. Start doing it. Let us know how it's going. You can do that by joining our Facebook group, New Money Habits Financial Coaches. Let us know how you're doing there. And or just feel free to, again, rate the show. We love to hear your feedback on that. I don't think we mentioned it at the top of the show today, so throw in that 30-second commercial right there. And I think that that's it for today, Cody.
Yep, I would agree. So thank you guys for listening. As always, we'll have another episode for you next week. And we'll hope to catch you there. So thank you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our hosts by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching. Music provided by Summer School.